Hello, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Jewelry Design Department at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Doing another tutorial in our series of tutorials um, for our Rhino modeling class. We're actually going to do a tutorial this evening for 3D Coat. This is the program that I recommend to many students to do soft surface sculpting techniques. I recommend it because it's affordable. The industry standard would actually be ZBrush, but ZBrush is many times more expensive. And you can achieve many of the same effects here in 3D Coat. This is the interface for 3D Coat. First thing to note is that I am using a stylus. 3D Coat is a pressure-sensitive program, so you'll want to use a Wacom tablet with a stylus. It is not as good to use. I mean, in theory, you could use something like a Surface Pro, but unless the stylus has additional buttons on it for increased functionality, you'll find it to be frustrating. So I use a Wacom tablet. All right. When you first open the program, you will receive this dialog right here, which gives you a choice of how you want to begin working. 3D Coat is actually designed for creating clothing for animation, for figure models, character studies. So that's the reason for the name, and that's why we have a lot of functionality in the way of painting, retopology, UV rendering, that sort of thing. We'll only be using the sculpting aspect of this, so if you click on surface sculpting, you will see a little dialogue that talks about how 3D Coat does sculpting, a little blurb, and then it gives you several options of prefab models you can pull in. Okay? This is what you will normally see when you open 3D Coat. I'm going to reopen the software and show you what I normally do with it. When I come in, I normally just close this out and go straight into the sculpt room. They call these rooms, if you look in the tutorials online for 3D Coat, they'll refer to these as the paint room, tweak room, retypo room, UV room, sculpt room, etc. And here, when you come in and do this, you'll get another little dialog box. It'll give you some tips as far as how to have more success in modeling. Settings you can use. The only two that are really going to matter is the option to lock the environment in the background. That's what you see here reflecting behind the grid. If you don't lock that as you pan and revolve, it moves with you, which can be difficult to model against, just for your contrast and to see what you're doing. The other is to increase your contrast of lighting, which is right up here. And the higher the contrast, in theory, the easier it is to model. But you will choose what you like. Okay? So normally I would just come in here and hit OK. And then I usually bring geometry in from Rhino. Okay? And start modeling from there. I am going to subject you to this one more time, because I do want to use one of those initial models. We'll use a figure. Okay, so this will give us something to look at while we talk about the interface. I'm just going to go from top to bottom here. Like all Windows application, you have your menu bar across the top with typical Windows type menus like File, Edit, View, Windows. Symmetry, Freeze, Geometry, these are separate menus, and these menus can change depending on what room you are in. Okay? Once again, in the sculpt room, this is what you'll have: File, Edit, View, Symmetry, Freeze, Geometry, Windows, Scripts, and Help. Help is okay. There is a YouTube channel that has some videos. That's really about it. So there's a little manual as well. The manual is kind of cryptic. This is Czechoslovakian software, so the manual isn't the best. but it's well worth the trouble to learn how to use. For $99, it's a tremendous amount of power for modeling. Of these menus, the ones we'll use the most is of course File to New and Open, Save, Save As, Import, Export. And then the Edit menu for your undo, redo, we can do that through keyboards, so we're not going to use this a lot. View you will use for your grid settings. In fact, we will set one of those now. We want to change our grid placement, make sure it's set to auto placement. So there it is. Freeze, symmetry, these are things we'll get into later. Geometry, this is a pop down that is the same pop down that you will get essentially if you right click anywhere over in here. You'll get a very similar menu here. Okay. These are just settings that you can put into play. I just always leave the defaults active. The next bar down tells you what the tool is. There are some features here that I normally check. Remove stretching is a good one. Keeps the surface from becoming too distorted. Invert tool, if you want to change a tool's function to its inverted state, instead of adding material, subtracting material, for example, or if the default is removing material, to have it add material. There are shortcuts for this, so you would only use this if you want to have it inverted for a substantial length of time. Steady stroke allows you to pull a more steady brush stroke. Can be useful at times. This is the readout for your brush. Okay. These are the properties of the brush as it's currently set. The next bar down tells you what room you're in. And then over here, here's your lighting control. As they pointed out in the little tablet at the beginning, the little window, you can slide this up and down to get higher or lower contrast of light. In theory, higher contrast is better for modeling, and lower contrast is better for rendering. But feel free to experiment. This changes the brightness of your light. This changes the direction of your light. So, there we go. You can see that the light changes as it moves across the figure, so you can choose what to highlight. See how that background is moving around? That's exactly what they were talking about, and we will check that in a moment to lock it. We'll do it now. Camera tab, background. Oh, it's already set to lock. Okay. If we unlock it, does it do the same annoying thing? Yes, it does. So apparently with the light, there's no way to change that from happening. Okay. This sharpens or blurs your panorama. These are your navigation buttons. We'll have shortcuts for all these, but if you want to control them by using a button, you can. You just touch the button, and then in 3D code, zooming is right to left. Up and down won't do much. Right to left. Okay. This I never use, your field of view. This basically is supposed to zoom to the entire scene, but it really doesn't. It zooms to the entire portion of the model that's currently selected. So if I change what's selected, it should update, but it doesn't always. If I zoom out, yeah, see, now it doesn't want to even play. I find this useful. It's not working very well right now, but there are times that this is very helpful when you have a complicated model and you are working very close in on something and you want to zoom out to see the whole model. This can be very helpful, but it is not doing much for us right now. So not all of the functions in 3D code are terribly reliable. That is a sad confession, but it's true. When it works, it's helpful. This focuses on your pen. This is nice because wherever you place your pen, wherever you're drawing at, you can zoom to that place. and it will focus on that. That can be useful. Okay, this puts the camera back to its default. This toggles between perspective and orthographic view. Okay, just like in Rhino, where we have, in Rhino they call it parallel and perspective. Notice how the grid lines retreat to a vanishing point. If I set that to ortho, notice how this also looks like a wide-angle lens. There's perspective on the little box icon. If I click on it, the little box icon becomes parallel. Also, your background environment disappears, and you get a standard gradient. Okay? This is if you want an orthographic sort of treatment of your model. It's also the way to get your best orthographic views. Remember, in Rhino orthographic views, top, front, side, well, the same thing happens here. But it's very elegant, actually. Instead of having a 4 viewport layout, basically you just revolve the model to roughly where you want it to be and then hold the Shift key down. And as it approaches where it's going to go, if you hold Shift, it will lock. Into an orthographic, straight-on orthographic view. It's important if you want true orthographic projection to have it in ortho mode, because if you put it in perspective mode, the same thing works. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that there's a certain amount of foreshortening, and it only truly works if your model's right in the middle of the scene. So if I move him right in the middle, it gives a fairly good representation of it. But if not, I can get variable results. See, you can see the other hand is not lined up, the other foot isn't lined up. So if you really want true orthographic views, you want to use this. Another final note on that is they both create a little distortion in your modeling. We'll go over here and take a look at the head. I find that the orthographic projection gives you the most realistic, accurate version. When I go into perspective, you'll see that his face gets stretched towards me. Looks like you're on Easter Island looking at one of those icons. So if you were looking for real accuracy, I usually toggle back and forth every so often to see what I'm getting, to ensure that I'm getting a good result. This turns your grid off and on. Easier to see with the dark background. Okay. This shows your axes. It's important to note that the coordinates in 3D Code are different than in Rhino. And they're color coded the same way, which is nice. But they are laid out differently. X is from right to left, as you would expect. But in Rhino, up and down would be Z. And in this program, it's Y. Z is coming straight at you. Now in Rhino that would be true if this were the front C-plane and you were using local coordinates, which is pretty advanced Rhino speak. In 3D Code it's consistent, it's always that way. So if I rotate this so that it becomes, the top grid becomes apparent, those axes stay the same. Red for X, blue for Z, green for Y. It is interesting that they use the complementary of the color going away the other direction. I really never have a reason to show that, but except for this tutorial where it's kind of nice. Okay. Right here, it toggles full screen. It removes your toolbar, so we're not going to do that. This allows you to change the environment that's going on in the background. Okay. And then your camera drop down. your camera drop down. You can set your navigation methods to whatever you want. If you want it to match a typical modeling program like Maya or Softimage, there's no Rhino here. You can also customize it. So you could customize your navigation to work exactly the same as Rhino. But I actually have grown accustomed to their native navigation, and I'll take a minute to go over that. Revolve, first off, there are two different modes in 3D Coat for navigation: outside of the model and inside of the model. If your mouse, and we'll zoom in a little bit to make this more meaningful. If your mouse is outside of the model, you don't need to use any alternative keys. And I'll go into ortho mode so we're not looking at that background. Okay. If I'm over the model, I have to use a supporting keystroke, and that's Alt. So for revolve, outside of the model, left mouse, click, drag. And it feels very much like Rhino. If I'm over the model, in order to get it to do the same thing, I have to hold down the Alt key. That icon you see right there, the circle with the red mountain in the middle of it, the red curve, bell curve, that's a brush. So if you see that and you touch down, you're going to start sculpting on something. So Alt acts like a clutch that actually disengages the brush from the surface and allows you to use it for navigation purposes. Okay. So that's revolve. Left mouse click outside the model, Alt left mouse click on the model. Pan is middle mouse button. And on top of the model, it's also middle mouse button. You don't have to use the Alt key. I recommend getting used to using the Alt key for all of the navigation, just because it's an easy habit to develop. But it doesn't need it for the pan. And zoom. Zoom is right mouse, click and drag. Now, I have to actually make a point here. You don't have to click. Your stylus will allow you to hover. So my stylus tip right now is actually about 1/4 inch off the tablet. The Wacom tablet still magnetically picks it up. You don't have to click. You just have to hover. Right mouse, drag. Okay. Once again, on the model, I have to hold down the Alt key. Review, revolve. Left mouse, click and revolve. And this one you do have to actually touch the tablet. Zoom, right mouse, hover, left to right. Gives you zoom. Over the model, you have to hold down the Alt key. Same is true with revolve. Pan requires middle mouse click, and that'll work either on the model or off the model. You don't need a modifier. You don't need the Alt key. Alright, so that is the default navigation method in 3D Coat. And back over to this menu, as I pointed out, you can customize that to match other programs if you'd like. I just keep theirs. This allows you to go front, back, left, right, top, bottom, look along normal. You don't need any of this. Just use the Shift key. Revolve, hold down Shift, and it will lock onto the nearest orthographic view. Okay. Shortcuts for cameras we don't need. Alright. So this revolves around different ways of rotating around different points in the model. Don't need it. Only thing we're going to ever use is right here at the top. The navigation and the background. Now background, you can, like for right now, if I'm tired of seeing this environment, I can hit vertical gradient. And now I have the same background whether I'm in ortho or perspective. And you can choose the colors for your gradient if you want to. You can choose a background image. I only do that if I'm going to do a render. It's not really useful for anything else. And then your environment map is what we had to begin with. So, and then it says down here, it says you can choose your environment map. Not really. You only have the 3 that we showed you right here. Those. Okay. Lock environment. This is what they advise you to do when you're modeling, so that the environment stays put. It doesn't keep moving around with you. It does keep you from getting seasick while you model. It's worth doing. Blur or sharpen. Once again, we saw that that was also available here. And at the bottom, this allows you to put reference images in for models. This is useful, and we'll talk about that in another video. Alright, so that is the top part of this user interface. The next parts of the user interface are the left panels and the right panels. The left panel are your brushes. All of your tools in 3D Code are referred to as a brush. That's very similar to ZBrush. For example, if you want to transform something in 3D Code, you want to scale it, for example, there's a brush for that. There is no transform menu or tab in here. There's a brush for that. To scroll up and down these drawers of brushes, you just right mouse click. And you don't have to even click. In fact, don't. Hover. Right mouse hover on your tablet and pull up. There's transform. So if I put on the transform, and now I can, if I grab the middle box, that'll scale him up and down. Okay. If I want to grab one of these rotation bars, I can rotate him. Okay. If I want to non-uniform scale him, grab one of these scale boxes. If I want to move him from side to side, okay. If I ever want to recenter him based on where this gizmo is at, I just hit X right here, and it brings him back to 0, 0. You can also enter actual dimensions and things right here if you want to. You can also change where the gizmo goes. So if I want the gizmo to go into the center of the creature, of the model, I can hit center mass, and that'll put it there. And so now that it's there, if I hit 0, 0, it'll zero him up based on where that gizmo is located. Okay? So these are your brushes. There are a whole bunch of them. The main layout is that your basic sculpting brushes tend to be right here. More advanced clay tools are down here. Adjusting tools like transform and move and cut off and things are down here. And then objects, if you want to make new objects or bring in more objects, is here. And a few commands at the bottom. Okay, this is autosave. 3D Code tells you when it's going to autosave with a little red warning. This is helpful because if you're working on a large model, your program can actually freeze while it's autosaving. And you don't want to be in the middle of a sophisticated brush stroke when it's autosaving. So it's a nice little warning to have. Okay, so these are also available by hitting your spacebar. They're right here. Okay, and you can actually set up. You can move this around to where you want it. You can set up your 10 top favorite ones here. To take them out, you just pull them out beyond the boxes and they go away. Okay, and if you want to put them back, you just find the brush, hover over where it was at, okay, and it'll allow you to put them back in. Alright, so, and this is what most people do. They use the space bar to get to the tools because scrolling up and down this is rather tedious. Alright, this is important. This little, now this button, by the way, hides that to the side. That's not very helpful. You get it back by just clicking on it, because you really want access to this. This is your stroke mode. Okay? Each one of these tells you how the brush is going to interact with the surface of the model. This changes the radius and the depth of your brush stroke. This changes just the depth. These are all how the pressure sensitivity interacts. This does everything, including opacity. Opacity is actually relevant for some of these brushes. Does come in handy. This is a droplet pressure. We don't use droplets for most of our work. This is a consistent brush stroke. This is like using no pressure sensitivity. It's like using a mouse. And then over here, this is a dot stroke. Once again, these are specialized strokes. They usually only light up if your tool supports them. These are vector-based tools, so you can actually drag a shape or create a shape and use that. It's really mostly for adjustment type tools like pose and things like that. It's not for regular modeling. For regular modeling, you'll use these first few here, but it's important to be able to access them because you'll want different pressure interaction with your model based on what you're going to do. At the bottom there are a couple of check boxes. Ignore back faces is usually always desirable. Otherwise your brush is going to go all the way through the model. And smooth back faces is also usually desirable to make sure you don't twist or distort anything on the back side of the skin of your model. Okay? So that's the left panel. Our final panel is over here to the right. This is actually devoted to this first top panel. Okay? You have alphas, brush options, strips, models, and splines. Alright? All of these, most of these deal with the brush stroke. Okay? The idea is that they work with brush strokes. So for alphas, for example, this changes the shape of the way your tool impacts the surface. Okay? So this is a 3D coat brush. Alright? See that rounded top? That is this alpha. The next alpha over is actually a dull point. I'm going to change the shader. I'll do that in a minute. This is a sharpen point. This is a blunt dome. This one I never use. It's kind of crazy. And then this is a flat top. You'll see you have all kinds of textured brushes and things you can do. You can explore those. But for modeling, it's really right here. Okay? These are different arrangements of brush strokes that you can use. Okay, so this is super pointy, for example. This allows you to create your own library, but usually default is fine. Brush options just tells you about the current settings on your brush. Strips allow you to create lines of detail across a model. Usually for clothing. Once again, these are for costumes. We're not going to use it. Models, I do use this occasionally. If I want to put a sphere or something into my model, you can find very similar tools down here at the bottom. Under objects, there's primitives. Okay, so you can add simple primitives that way on the end of your brush. Okay. So you can find things like Rhino. You can find things in more than one place. Okay. Splines, once again, create specialized brush treatments for textures, which are interesting. You can play with them, but for basic modeling, not necessary. This next tab gives you presets. Once again, not something we're going to use very much. Stencils are nice for applying texture. And shaders. By the way, under stencils you have circles, gradients, lines, n-gons, rounds, squares. These are all textures you can apply, and we'll talk about that in future videos if we get to it. Just know that it's there for your own exploration. Shaders allow you to change the material on your model. Okay. The current one on the model. Okay. This is actually Clay 2, They all have names: clay, and it will only be applied to the part of the model that you have selected. So we need to talk about this level before we can do much here. But this allows you to change the material your model's displayed in. This layers this layers panel is broken into two categories. There's quite a bit of information here. This is similar to a layers panel in Rhino or Painter. Basically a way of organizing your model. If a title, okay, you see S's and V's. First off, 3D Coat allows you to model using surface technology or voxel technology. If I had a chalkboard, this would be easier. Voxels, surface is what we're used to. In 3D Coat, in Rhino, if we export an STL, we have a mesh object. Okay? And you can see it looks like a nylon stocking, right? This has the same thing. You don't see it. There's no wireframe mode to see the display here. So I don't think, maybe there is. I never asked that question before. Indeed there is. There's the wireframe, if you ever want to see it. Okay. Voxel mode is actually little cubes, three-dimensional cubes. It's one of the most powerful aspects of 3D Coat is that it is a voxel modeler, which means you can convert your geometry into voxels at any time. The beauty of voxels is that they're actually a geometric solid. It's like a solid block of clay, which means anything that you export from here in a voxel state should be 3D printable without any problem. Okay? All that effort we go through in Rhino to create a closed object happens here automatically if you turn the S into a V. To do that, you just click on the S. It'll tell you how many voxels it's going to create to match what you have in a surface. And there, now that's voxel mode. You'll see not much changes. Okay? Alright, so now you have some voxels, some surface. It's important to note that modeling on voxels, you use different brushes than you do modeling on surface. It doesn't, you don't have to make that selection, it does it for you. So if I'm working on the mannequin parent, for example, I'll come in here and I'll apply material to it. Unfortunately, that's a folder, and that's going to ruin what I had just declared to be true. Normally, guys, if it has a 1x, an integer right here, it's not a folder name, it's geometry. If it says 1x, sometimes it is just a folder name. These are just folder names. It's a tree. If I close the top one, if I turn off the top one, they all disappear. Okay? By the way, you have three options here. You have visible and invisible. This is ghosted, which is not going to change anything at the folder level. And then your voxel versus surface mode. Okay? This folder and everything under it is resting inside of the folder on top. You can see that they step in like bullet points. Okay? So the pelvis is at the same level as the midsection, but these are both contained within the it's actually the same level as the midsection, but it's contained inside of the upper body parent. So if I click that, it's going to still disappear, and all that I'll have left are the legs that are visible. Okay, so even though pelvis's eye is on, right arm, all these eyes are on, I turned off an upper level folder and it disappeared. As long as that's on, I can turn it off at the sub level and you'll see it. And here's where you can actually, when you actually have geometry involved, is when you can actually assign materials. This is just telling you to change settings if you need to. This is too sophisticated for the purposes of this video. Just say OK. Alright. And so that gives us a setting there. Alright, midsection. Alright, so you can now it's interesting, left leg is actually the upper legs. I didn't name these. Interesting. So there's a linkage here that I'm not really following. Obviously these are in some... Oh, there's more than one. Maybe. Nope. It is the right leg and the left leg. These are nested in... Oh, there we go. You can pop these open and you can actually see all the sub-objects, okay? So these can become very, very sophisticated. Please do not do this with your own work. Okay? Understand it's how it works. Understand that you rest objects inside of other objects. Realize there's a parent-child relationship. The left arm is everything below this upper torso is a child of the upper torso. Everything that's below the left arm is a child of the left arm. Everything that's below the lower left arm is a child of the lower left arm, and so on. Okay? Actually modeling on any of these, we're not going to do really any of that in this video, other than to say that in order to model on something you have to select it. So you have to click, like in Painter, if you don't select on the proper layer you're not going to make any impact on it. So if I want to upper torso, for example, if I want to model, if I select that, I can model on it. Okay? I have the potential to do that if I want to use the move command brush. You know, I can stretch that quite a bit. Also, it's important to note how these brushes work. This will be the final thing we talk about in this video. The circle you see is the size of the brush. You change that. You can't change it outside of the model. You can only change this when your brush is over the model, when your stylus is over the model. If you right-click, don't use the Alt key, just a regular right-click, what would normally be a zoom here, and it's hovering, you don't have to touch, you can just hover. If you're using a stylus. Mouse, it's a click. If you right-click or hover, and then slide left to right, you will scale the size of the brush. Okay? Alright. The other feature you see inside, that profile, is how strong the brush is. If you right click and then drag up and down, you change how strong it is. If you touch the outside of the brush, you're at 100%, pretty much. You can actually see it. It's under depth, 96%. Okay? So if I have this set to the higher depth, it's going to make a lot more impact on the model. Alright? And if I change the profile, I'm going to get a slightly different interaction with the model. Okay? Other features. So we know how to increase the size, know how to increase the strength. What if I want to go in if you see a red line, it's in its default mode. If I want to reverse the mode, which for the Rapid 2 brush is to add material, if I want to reverse it, I hold the control key down. That bell curve turns blue. When it's blue, the mode of the brush is reversed. Okay. Okay. If I hold down the Shift key, it becomes green. That gives us the smoothing mode of the brush. So, a very typical workflow when you're sculpting would be to come in, do some sculpting, and then smooth it. You know, do more sculpting and maybe smooth it. Okay? Alright, so that's how brushes work. That's the basic interface. That's enough for one video. Thanks so much for watching.